Welcome to Stay Focused. Our topic is electrical. With me here today is Mark Ryder. Mark has been a licensed electrician for roughly 31 years, and he is here today to share with us about different advice, recommendations, and his expertise about electrical. Welcome, Mark.
Thank you, Calvin. Pleasure.
Thank you for being here.
My pleasure.
So the first question is, what is GFCI?
GFCI is a plug that provides a safety factor in, you'll find them bathrooms, kitchens, and what it does is it registers the imbalance between the neutral and the ground, and if it finds that, it shuts off and protects the consumer.
So basically, GFCI is more related to safety hazard.
It is, and it was incorporated, at least a decade ago into the code,
Right.
with some resistance, but subsequently it was found to be embraced by everyone at this point.
And also GFCI has to do with optical as well.
That's right. It was
right.
brought into code, more than a decade ago,
Right.
and it's truly an important feature in safety. I've seen some people who try to test this by putting their hand in the pool and throwing
Good luck, right?
a live
Yeah.
Wire into the pool, and it literally shuts the circuit right off. So
Right,
it is
right.
it does its job. And
Did it get shocked?
No, it get nothing. It shuts right off.
Okay, good to know. Yeah, so
It really does.
good to know. So in terms of residential, and this is the Norman tube, and that's what it looks like.
This is the ground fault. That's right. This is the GFI ground fault interrupter, and you'll find them in bathrooms all the time, and you'll find them in kitchens. All the kitchen circuits that are on the counter have to be, by code, shall be ground fault protected, and that shot on the top left is an actual picture of one. And the way it's utilized is once it is wired, you press the reset button, and that will liven the power to it. And then to check to see whether or not it is operating correctly or not, you'll press the test button. And that test button ought to shut it off, and then you can reset it again with the reset button.
Interesting. So for most of you who do not know what a GFCI looks like, and that's what it looks like.
That's it.
Right. And as we know, most properties, especially properties that were built in the 1900s or before, or up until 1920 or 30 or something like that, in the old days, they didn't have any circuit breaker boxes, so they used fuses along with Norman tubes. Norman tubes, again, most people haven't seen Norman tube, so when most people say Norman tube, they don't know what they mean or what they mean. So can you talk about what is Norman tube?
This picture here is a good example of what you would find in an older home. Calvin, I will tell you that today I was working in an attic, and I had to remove a considerable amount of Norman tubing in a house that customers bought. And at one point it was considered to be a very, very safe wiring method because the conductors are approximately 3 inches away from each other, the conductors meaning the hot wire and the neutral wire. So there was less likelihood of any short circuits. The problem is that over the years it has become so old that the moisture in the insulation has broken down, and the insulation on the wire has literally broken off the conductor, the copper itself.
Right.
So now you're getting exposed wires, and therein lies the issue. And you'll find when a house is sold that oftentimes the insurance companies will have issues with the house if it has Norman tubing in it. And subsequently, I've been called on a number of occasions where the insurance company has required the potential buyers or the sellers to remove or at least de-energize the Norman tubing.
I see. So for insurance purposes, I mean, would knob and tube be more expensive than houses without knob and tube? Common sense questions, of course.
Well, you know, in my opinion, the knob and tubing should go away in every case, and that's because the insulation is so bad these days that that we're getting exposed wires, and that causes, you know, a safety hazard.
I see. Always good to know. And so, when it comes to residential properties, most properties require smoke detectors, especially when sellers are selling their properties before closing. They have to install proper smoke detectors in proper places within their properties. And so, why is it important to have smoke detectors inside the residential property?
Well, what they do is they're alarms that will, on two different types of circumstances. When there's smoke hazard, there will be an alarm that will that the smoke alarm will you know, cause, and as well as fire. It recognizes fire as well, and it will set the alarm off during a fire as well. Smoke tends to be the culprit because it's usually asphyxiation before you're burned. So that it detects smoke is considerably important. And there's also now carbon monoxides that are required that that recognize and set an alarm off if there's any carbon monoxide in the air.
Right. And so, in terms of smoke detectors, I mean, there are a couple of types of smoke detectors, right? Can you talk about those?
Sure. If we're close to what would happen was there would be inadvertent alarms that would go off if you're cooking, or if the steam from a bathroom or steam from a kitchen, you know, light cooking, it would go off because all of the smoke detectors were ionization type smoke detectors. So what they've done is now they've incorporated a photoelectric smoke detector, so it hinders that inadvertent kind of alarm setting off. So there are two types, the photoelectric, and those are usually within 20 feet of a kitchen or a bathroom.
Right. And so those are different types of smoke detectors.
Right, the photoelectric, the ionization.
Right, and most of them are battery, and most of them are hot wire.
Right, they're hardwired with a battery backup now. That's pretty much a required situation. And again, those batteries should be changed as we turn ahead or turn back our clocks. That's kind of like the go-to time.
Right.
You know, the safe time.
Right. So why is it important to have numbers in front of the property?
Well, when I've been required to, when I change smoke detectors out, to by the inspector, to have a legible and a visible house number on the house, so that if you dial 911 and you're asking for the emergency crew to come to your house, they need to know where you live, and it needs to be a visible number on the house so that the emergency people can find your house and adequately do what they have to do.
Right. So it's good to be having the numbers outside the property, because you know, without a number, in case of, like you said, emergency or something like that, no one can find that property.
And if they, you know, if you need their assistance, you want them to know where you live.
Right, that's right.
You want them to know where you live.
Right.
So it's really important. It's visible numbers on your house.
Right. And so in terms of amps wise, now in the property, there are living room, bathroom, dining room, kitchen, etc., etc. Now, does each room require its own amperage, if you will?
Well, new houses now are required to have what's called arc fault protection.
Right.
And what that does is it recognizes an arc, and the arc is pretty much a loose connection, and it will shut the circuit breaker off. So what we need is, in kitchens, you have to have certain amounts of circuits on the counter, circuits for your appliances, and you in the bathroom you need a separate plug for your separate circuit for your plug in the bathroom. Dining rooms need separate 20 amp circuits. So there is a list of required circuits that are needed in particular rooms, especially kitchens, bathrooms, dining rooms. They all require 20 amp circuits, and each appliance in the kitchen should have its own circuit.
Oh, it's always good information to know. In terms of definition-wise of each category, if you will. So what is the definition of amperage, voltage, and resistance?
Right.
Yeah.
That's a good question. Not to get too technical about it, but what we're looking at is the amperage is let's call it the flow of power, and voltage is, if you will, the pushing along of the power. And then there's also resistance, which is the restriction of power being flown. So the smaller the wire, the higher the resistance. And that's why there are different size wires. There's, number 14, number 12, number 10. For instance, 10 is required for a dryer. Number 12 are the 20 amp circuits in the kitchen and the bathrooms. So the amperage is the amount of power that an appliance may use. It may be 7 amps for a refrigerator, or garbage disposal may be, again, 5 or 7 amps. So that's what the amperage is, and that's how you determine the size of the wire that's required for that particular appliance. And then the voltage is what pushes the amperage along, and the resistance are the things that restrict the flow of amperage.
Oh, that's good. In terms of properties, as I mentioned before, contain fuses. So what are the alternatives with property that have fuses instead of circuit breaker boxes? Okay,
well, when fuses were utilized, and there's a particular box of fuses, it's certainly a safe protector, fuses. But what happens is the ability to, at this point, where circuit breakers have really taken on the typical power to the house, it's difficult to get fuses at a moment's notice. If you have a circuit that blows, you may not have those fuses available, and you may have to run out to Home Depot or any other large box store, maybe even your local hardware store. Some of them carry them, but they're becoming more difficult to find these days. So circuit breakers are resettable, where once they're in the panel and there is an overload or a short circuit and that circuit shuts off, you're then able to go downstairs if the panel is in the basement and switch the breaker off and then on again, and now you have your circuit back on. So it's incredibly convenient.
That's good. So in terms of old outlets, now a lot of houses they have two-prong outlets.
Right.
And so how do you replace a two-prong outlet to a three-prong outlet with GFCI outlet?
Okay, well, if the two-prong doesn't have the ability to be grounded, in other words, if it doesn't have that third wire, there's a black wire, the hot, there's the white wire, the neutral, and the ground. If you don't, you can substitute a ground fault for the two-prong, but it has to be noted as such. It has to be noted that this is taking the place of a two-prong and there's no ground. What you can also do is BX, which is the metal armored cable, is the ground that that flows or continues from one box to another, providing that the clamps are tight, then you have a continued bond, if you will, but it was then used as a ground. So you really need to have that third wire to actually have an adequate ground. The third wire is the important piece of the pie here.
Right. And so those can be easily done, or should people hire a licensed electrician to do it?
Well, again, I'm an advocate of having anyone, whether it be a plumber, electrician. It's important that we have professionals do the jobs that are required by that professional. Especially electricity. You know, if you do Calvin, as a plumber, if you do your own stuff, you're going to get a leak. You're going to have
That's right.
But if you're messing with electricity and you have a bad mistake, it could be fatal.
Yeah, it could be fatal.
Truly be
It could
fatal.
cause fire.
Yeah.
Right.
Or a fire, right?
Yeah.
So I'm a big advocate of having the professional do the work. They're licensed for a reason.
Right, and they're not expensive to replace the outlets.
No,
if you will.
no, it's not. It's not.
Yeah, right.
It's not expensive at all.
Right, but I think that it is important to do it right, and to follow all the codes as well.
Exactly.
Yeah, right. Just so that further down the road, it can be prevented from having fire.
Well, that's why they have codes in place, whether it be an electrical code or it's a plumbing code or a building. Right. Those codes are in place, and they are minimum requirements. They're not. They're minimal requirements that are needed to make safe. Whether it be, again, plumbing, electrical, building. You don't want your roof falling in. You don't want your pipe leaking, nor do you want your house on fire. So
That's right.
I would suggest you hire a professional.
Right. I agree. So from a buyer perspective, let's say if a buyer was looking at a house, and when it comes to electrical, what are the most important things that a buyer should look at? You don't have to tell them all, but I think it's just a few things, if you will.
Right. Well, I think what's important is that when I oftentimes do inspections for homeowners, they'll sometimes hire me as an electrical professional to see what the electrical system is. And what's important, in my opinion, is that there are a number of circuits derived from the fuse panel and or the circuit breaker panel going out to the kitchen, the living room, the dining room, wherever, so that we can determine whether or not a lot of those things that are being utilized in the house have enough circuitry to them. So it's important to have a lot of circuits leaving that panel in solving a lot of the needs that are in the kitchen, in the dining room, in the bathroom. Open splices are an important piece of the pie. When you have wires that are just dangling that may be live, it's a hazard. That there's enough plugs in the rooms. One on each wall would be nice, but there are often times when I find there's one or two in these older homes that just isn't going to solve the problem. So we have to run new circuits down the wall to provide more plugs in the bedrooms as needed.
Right. So in terms of selling a property, when it comes to electrical, what would you recommend the seller to do if the seller is thinking about putting their home on the market?
Gotcha. Above and beyond anything, I would suggest that we walk through and make sure that when the home inspector comes to inspect for the buyer, that we have everything that needs to be adequately made safe to be adequately made safe, and that is making sure that there's no dangling wires that are alive. Things like the kitchen circuits, if we can provide kitchen circuits, you know, we need 2 kitchen circuits on the counters, you know, circuits for each appliance. I think anything outside that may be not covered or protected is important. You know, you don't want, especially outside, if something's wet, you don't want to have to deal with any safety hazards, you know?
Right. Well, there's important tips. And in terms of finding a licensed electrician or licensed electricians, other than yourself, what are the good resources for most consumers to look up licensed electricians?
Well, you know, you can of course Google whomever. There's Craigslist and there's you know, certain places.
Right.
But you know, if you were to ask your building inspector just for some advice, he may not be able to pick anyone for you because he might be, you know, playing partisan stuff.
Right,
but,
right.
but the building inspector can direct you to certain electricians in the town, plumbers in the town, that could provide help for them. That's one source. Of course, you know, there's the white pages, you know, .com now,
Right,
of course.
right.
But you know, if you need an electrician, I would suggest that you always use referrals. Referrals are an important piece of the pie, because if someone has been satisfied with that particular contractor, they're going to be well noted by those who have hired them.
Right.
So referrals are important.
Right, and they actually reliable and also, you know, I would say trustworthy as well.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So when most consumers, including buyers and sellers, on future homeowners, look for an electrician, a licensed electrician, what kind of questions should they ask, and what type of experiences that they should look into when they want to hire a licensed electrician to perform works in and outside their property?
Gotcha. I would first of all ask, are they insured?
Yep.
Because being insured is an important, very important requirement for any buyer or anyone who's looking to have an electrician and or, you know, a plumber or whomever. Licensed is important. Insured is important. There was just recently, I guess, I heard about a circumstance, it was on the news, where this couple were running ads on Craigslist, and they were picking up deposits but weren't doing the work. So again, I think that's where referrals are an important piece of the pie. It really is.
Right.
Referrals.
Referrals, right.
Absolutely.
Right, that's right. And for those of people who inspired or aspire to be a licensed electrician, I mean, what kind of tips and advice would you give them?
Well, they have technical schools. They have Blue Hills Regional. There's I know the I've hired helpers out of Blue Hills Regional Technical School. Schooling is important. I know that when I went a few years ago,
Not too long.
No, not too long. It was a very good high school that I went to, and I was able to work a week and go to academic school the other week. So it was a co-op course, and that provided me the ability to have hands-on. So if someone who was looking to get involved in the industry, I would suggest that they speak to someone that they know, the family member that they know, to find out if they would take on, you know, an apprentice, and get there. You got to get your hands on. You know, anyone can talk about it, and anyone can learn it in a book, but there's nothing more important than getting your hands dirty in the business.
Right. I agree. You're gonna learn from a battlefield, right?
That's right. Exactly.
And so the last question is that what kind of important safety tips that you would give to most consumers like myself when it comes to electrical, inside or outside their home?
Hire a professional.
Hire a professional.
Hire a
Yep.
professional.
Yep, right.
It's critically important.
Right.
You know, I'm willing to, you know, walk around someone's house and show them what might be an issue, but ask a lot of questions. You know, don't be afraid to ask a lot of questions, because you know, if he's or she is a professional, those questions should not be an interference. That should be something that they're willing to do for, you know, the consumer.
Right.
So don't be afraid to ask questions, and the questions the answers that you get may save money and save lives.
Right. I agree. So make sure the consumer in general did their homework.
Right.
Yeah, and ask proper questions, because this is what I usually say: no questions are stupid questions.
That's right.
If they don't ask, how would you know?
That's right.
So the
Exactly.
most important, do your homework,
Right.
ask questions, and if a licensed electrician who is professional enough and do their job, of course, right? They should answer your questions properly.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and satisfy you, if you will, in terms of services, their expertise as well. So, Mark, I want to thank you so much for being on the show.
Kevin, thank you for your time, and I'm happy
you.
to do it for you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you. So I hope the knowledge and also the expertise Mark has just shared will be helpful to you as a seller or buyer, or general consumers, if you will. Thank you for being part of the show. See you next time.